Grief takes many forms: denial, anger, sadness. But for one woman, grief took the most incomprehensible form of all. To survive the tragedy that had destroyed her family, she did not seek revenge. She sought the altar with the killer himself. This is not a love story. It is a dive into the abyss of the human psyche. The house was silent. It was a new silence, a heavy silence, filling the spaces where once there had been laughter, conversation, life. Laura moved through the rooms like a ghost, in her own past. Every object was a relic, every corner a memorial. A week ago, this house had been her sanctuary. Now it was the scene of a crime, the epicenter of the fracture that had shattered her existence. She was the sole survivor, an eyewitness to the night Daniel, a man she knew, a family friend, had taken everything from her. The initial pain was exactly as the textbooks describe it: a numbing shock, followed by waves of agony so intense it felt physical. Society rallied around her, offering condolences, compassion, and a clear script for her grief. She was to cry, to rage, to demand justice, and for a while she followed the script. She cooperated with the police, gave her testimony with a cold precision that startled the detectives, and prepared herself for the final act of this tragedy: the trial. The trial was a media circus. Daniel, the perpetrator, sat in the dock, his expression blank and unreadable. The prosecution painted him as a monster, a demon incarnate. The defense claimed a psychotic episode, a temporary insanity. Laura, sitting in the front row, was the living symbol of the victim, the center of everyone's attention. But while the world saw a monster and a victim, Laura began to see something else. Forced to face him day after day, she began to notice more than just the anger. Deep in his eyes, she didn't see the pure evil everyone described. She saw an abyss, a void, a hole so deep and desolate that, to her horror, she recognized it. It was the same void that now resided within her. He was the cause of her abyss, but he also seemed to be the only other person in the universe who understood its depths. This realization was a terrible secret, a seed of something incomprehensible that had begun to sprout in the ravaged soil of her soul. Daniel was sentenced to life in prison, without the possibility of parole. Justice had been served for the world. Laura's family, her friends, society, everyone expected her to begin the long journey of rebuilding, that she would move, sell the house, and try little by little to forget. But Laura didn't follow the script. Years passed. Daniel's name faded from the headlines. But he never disappeared from Laura's mind. Instead of walking away from his memory, she began walking toward him. It began with a letter, a short letter, one she wrote and rewrote dozens of times. In it, there was no forgiveness, no hatred, just one question: why? Daniel's response began a correspondence that would last for years. The letters were monitored, read by prison censors, but the communication took place on a deeper level. They did not talk about the crime. They talked about the silence, about the nightmares, about the feeling of being a ghost among the living. From the letters came the requests for visits, and from the visits came the decision that shocked the country and defied all logic of psychology and justice. Laura, the sole survivor, asked for permission to marry Daniel, the man who had destroyed her life. The wedding was a surreal ceremony. It took place in a multi-purpose room in a maximum security prison. There were no flowers, just the smell of disinfectant. There was no music, just the hum of fluorescent lights and the echo of steel doors slamming in the distance. Laura wore a simple dress. Daniel wore his prison uniform. A justice of the peace, looking uncomfortable, officiated the union through reinforced glass. They did not touch. The rings were exchanged through a small, metal drawer. To the world, it was an act of madness. To Laura, it was the only act that made sense in a world that had lost all meaning. Laura's married life was a routine of solitude and bureaucracy. Bi-weekly visits, always separated by glass. 15-minute phone calls, always monitored. Letters that took weeks to arrive. Their marriage existed in this limbo, this sterile space between the free world and perpetual confinement. She became Daniel's only connection to the outside world, his only visitor, his only correspondent. The power dynamics had been reversed in a complex and disturbing way. To understand how radical and atypical Laura's journey was, we need to look at Marcos's case. Marcos was a man who, like Laura, had his family annihilated in a senseless act of violence. But his path was one that society applauded and understood. Consumed by righteous rage, Marcos became an activist. He created a foundation in his family's name, fought for stricter laws, gave lectures, appeared on television. His pain was transformed into public action, his anger into a driver for change. He became a hero, the voice of those who could no longer speak. Marcos's journey was logical, linear, admirable, and it was the perfect mirror to reflect Laura's journey as a profound and disconcerting enigma. Why did she choose silence while he chose to scream? The secret to deciphering this enigma may lie in one of the letters Laura wrote to Daniel, an artifact of her psyche. Let's analyze an excerpt. The letter was obtained during a psychological evaluation that attempted to understand her decision. The narrator reads, "People expect me to hate you. They don't understand. Hatred is a noisy feeling, and there is no more room for noise inside me. Since that night, all that exists is silence, and you are the only one who understands silence. You do not fear it. You live in it. You created it." Notice her choice of words. Laura doesn't write, "I forgive you," or "I love you." She writes, "You understand." She's not connecting with the man through romantic love or Christian forgiveness. She's connecting with the architect of her own emptiness. It's a bond that transcends good and evil, a phenomenon that psychology calls traumatic bonding. A bond forged not in affection but in the shared experience of destruction, even if one is the cause and the other the consequence. So what is the truth about Laura's psyche? Psychology offers several theories, all of which fail to explain the entirety of her decision. Was it an atypical form of Stockholm Syndrome, where the victim develops a bond with the abuser as a survival mechanism, even years later? Or was it the most subtle and definitive exercise of power imaginable? By marrying Daniel, Laura became the owner of his legacy, his only window to the world, the controller of his existence. He took the lives of her family, and she, in return, took the rest of his life for herself. A cold, silent, and perpetual revenge. Or perhaps the explanation is simpler and at the same time more complex. Perhaps for a person who has lost everything, the only way to feel whole again is to hold on to the only remaining piece of the puzzle of their old life, even if that piece is the very hand that destroyed it. The final scene is the same as always. Laura on one of her visits, she and Daniel sitting on opposite sides of the glass. There is not much to say. They just look at each other, in a silence that only they understand. She does not seem happy nor sad, just present. She has found a way to carry on, a way that the world will never understand. The story has no resolution, because Laura's life is still being lived. What we are left with is observation and the final question. What is more frightening? The act of violence that starts a tragedy, or the act of incomprehensible union that rises from its ashes, forcing us to question everything we think we know about grief, forgiveness, and the darkest corners of the human soul?